Hi, and welcome to Talking with Tapolci. I'm your host, Jason Tapolci. If you've watched previous episodes, you'll know that we've been talking about the scaling cycle, which is essentially the cycle that any company goes through in order to scale their company with sustainable growth. And a few episodes ago, we spoke to Natalie DiCario from the growth phase, and she spoke a little bit about how growth is made up as pretty much your strategy and your marketing and sales teams. And then last week, we spoke with Tim Lin, our lead engineer here at VoIP Innovations. And Tim spoke to us about how do you take what growth has promised and deliver on that promise. And finally, this week, we're going to have the third part of this triangle, which is we've invited Randy Stegner to join us, VoIP Innovations Operations Manager. And he's going to talk to us a little bit about the support phase and what he does here for VoIP Innovations as the operations manager. So we welcome Randy. And Randy, can you give us a little bit of idea of what the operations manager does for VoIP Innovations and what your role is?
Sure, Jason. Thanks for having me. So I am the operations manager, as you said, and I have three teams that directly report to me, which would be the technical support, our porting department, and our billing department. But whenever you think of support in the scaling cycle, it goes much deeper than that. So the way you want to think of it there is you are supporting pretty much everything going on in the company. So while those teams report directly to me, it's also important that I assist those teams with communicating in a good manner with the other teams, so with the growth team and the delivery team as well.
So that's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up. You have your teams that report directly to you, and you can change things, add processes for your teams, but then you're dealing with inside the company, but outside your departments. And then I would imagine that you're also dealing with outside the company. And is that true? And talk to us a little bit about that.
Yes, exactly. You mentioned processes, and that's very important. So the way I look at it, there's two keys really to really kind of hone in on your support side of your business, and that is processes and communication. So as you mentioned, we have internal communication and processes, but we also have external. So we're dealing with vendors. For example, with some of the vendors that we deal with, they may have different processes as well. So we have to adapt to those. So we have the way we do things internally amongst our teams. For example, when a ticket comes in, there's a certain way that the support team is going to handle that. They've got a ticket board they look at. They know who's in what ticket, and that allows things to flow smoothly throughout the day. And what you're trying to avoid there is confusion. On the other hand, you have the external communication and processes with your outside vendors. So they may do things slightly different between them, so you have to adapt to them. So it's all about refining those processes to make sure that you're being the most efficient that you can be to support your customers.
So, if I was to put a word with each phase, I think the growth phase, you would say that's strategy. You're building your strategy. Your word would probably be, it might be two words, processes, right? I think the whole support and operational phase is made up of processes, and those processes are ever changing, as we know, and you're constantly fighting that, but also communication. So if you were to wrap that up and say, hey, in the support phase, I'm an ITSP or VoIP reseller, what advice would you give to me on running my support phase? Would it be the processes and communication?
Yes, I would say, but I would also include the necessity of anticipating problems. So, for example, when you're dealing with the growth team, they're out there trying to drive the growth of the business.
Right.
And it's up to the delivery team to support that. But unless you have that good communication between all of your teams, that's where you can get into trouble, I think. It's important that, let's say, for example, the growth team wants to do a promotion where they're going to be selling something at a lower price than what you would normally do. They need to communicate that with the delivery team so that they can make that happen on your website, for example.
Yeah.
But what you don't want to have happen is your customers calling in inquiring about this, but none of your internal teams know it. So somebody gets a hold of support and they're like, hey, I saw this promotion on your website. can you tell me a little bit more about it? And the support person's on the other line going, I'm not sure what this is.
Right.
So it's very important that all the teams internally have that communication so that they're all on the same page and that you're looking good to your customers.
And in the support phase and operational phase, you're going to find that it's a more tactical side of the business. Whereas your growth phase is your strategic side, right? We talked about having that differentiator and solving a pain point and that aligning with your core values and belief system. But down here, it's a tactical part of your company. And, there's also a framework that we use every day. It's 3 words. He'll know what they are. And, to run that tactical part of it. And do you know what those 3 words are?
Yeah, priority, data, and rhythm.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. So, obviously in day-to-day operation, things are going to come up that are going to be beyond your control. You're going to have to be reactive. That's the phase you kind of want to stay out of, but it's part of business. So, that's where the priority comes in. You want to make sure that you're putting your focus where it needs to be for the day. There may be a particular problem with a vendor, we'll say, and that support's dealing with, that could have a ripple effect for your customers. So you've got to make that your top priority. And those things change from day to day. But then the next piece of that is the data. You want to be making sure that you are looking at your reports, that you're hearing from your team members, that you're listening to what they're telling you, and you're kind of taking all of that data and you're making your decisions based on that data. And then finally, the rhythm, and it's a daily rhythm, and it kind of encompasses all of that, where you're communicating, you're meeting regularly. We have internal meetings with the various teams. We have senior staff meetings, we have boarding meetings, we have support meetings. So you want to be able to get into a good rhythm there. And again, that kind of falls back to communication.
So, with the support side of the business, we now identified it's more of a tactical side. And Randy's absolutely right. Priority, data, and rhythm as the 3 components that you use to run those day to day. Matter of fact, you can use those in your personal life, works great, or even in business life. And when you're talking using this scaling cycle in your business, the whole goal is to make sure we spin the support phase, right? Because we've learned in the past that we spin at one revolution, that'll move that choke point to the next phase, which in this case would be the growth phase.
Correct. So it's my job to get that support wheel spun one time, make sure everything's good so we can get back to growth, which is what we all want, the growth of our business. So in order to do that, you've got to refine your processes constantly. You want to make sure that you're hearing from your customers. You want to make sure that you're listening to your teams. Again, processes and communication go hand in hand. And if you don't guard against these things, they're going to take a back seat. Things are going to deteriorate, and you're not going to be paying attention. And before you know it, your revenue's down and your business isn't growing. So it's very important to guard against those 2 things and make sure that your teams are communicating, that you're hearing from your customers, because a lot of times, a customer might get upset and they just may decide to go elsewhere without even telling you. So it's so important that you communicate all of that to your teams and make sure that everybody's on the same page.
And it's to his point there. It's the analogy is death by 1,000 cuts in support. You're not going to die off the first couple cuts, but eventually you will, and it happens slowly and over time. And to another point that Randy made, there's a reason why growth is at the top of the triangle, right? And it's because without growth, there would be no delivery and support, or nothing to support. So I wanted to thank Randy for coming out today and talking a little bit about the support phase, what makes it go round, what he does here as an operations manager. And next week, we're going to plan on having everybody back. So we're going to have Sebastian, our product manager, in. We're going to have Natalie DiCario, the growth phase leader, Tim Lynn, the delivery phase leader, and then Randy as well. We're going to have a little sit down and question and answer. So again, thanks for tuning in. We really appreciate it. I'm Jason Tapolci with Talking with Tapolci.